Florida may be just hours away from a direct hit by a Category 4 hurricane that's already killed more than 100 people. Hurricane Matthew could be the largest, most powerful storm to hit America in a decade. It's packing winds of up to 140 miles per hour. Florida's governor is warning this is life or death. There could be unprecedented damage, and millions are about to lose power. The entire East Coast is on alert. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Rick Reichmuth is tracking the storm from the Fox Weather Center. Jonathan Sari is near Charleston, South Carolina. But we begin with Steve Harrigan live in Wabasso Beach, Florida, near Vero Beach, and he's already taking a beating from this storm. Steve.
Conditions here are just really getting started. We've seen some gusts of 30 to 40 miles per hour. The rain coming in a little bit now, a little bit sideways. The waves picking up as well. Over the course of the afternoon, the beach has pretty much disappeared, and it's likely some of these resort properties in front of me could be underwater by the day's end. The worst case scenario for the state of Florida would be a direct hit. That's something Governor Scott has been warning about. He says the results of a direct hit on Florida would be catastrophic. It would bring with it 140-mile-per-hour winds. That's enough to knock down houses, knock down big trees, knock off roofs, really destruction everywhere, as well as a storm surge of up to 10 feet in some places, well over my head. So people across the state bracing for it. He said if you live on the east coast of Florida, at the very minimum, you're going to lose electricity, and let's hope it doesn't get worse than that.
Steve, I had a question about how slow moving this storm is. What are you hearing about the possibility of it going, I guess right now, 14 miles per hour? It's not moving very quickly, and that would be more damaging, supposedly, if it hits the coast straight on.
It would be more damaging. That means the storm would linger over the area. It could bring with it up to 12 inches of rain, and the scope of this storm would be tremendous as well. I mean, we've got hurricane warnings all the way up from where I'm standing now, all the way up north to Jacksonville. So an enormous area of territory to try and keep people safe in. They've alerted National Guard across the state. They've opened shelters, but depending on the way this storm moves, and it's certainly not an exact science, this could be a real challenge to try and keep people safe through the night.
All right, Kimberly?
Steve, are you getting the sense that people were heeding the warnings and are adequately prepared for this onslaught?
I think people were scared. I think the governor was pretty effective in saying this could be a deadly storm, and he was effective in telling people who've never been through one here in Florida. 2 million people here have arrived in the past decade. They've never been through the last big storm. So for a lot of people who didn't know, he's been saying over and over again, this could be a deadly storm. And you know, it's hard to get a hotel room right now. It's hard to find water. There's a 3-hour line at Home Depot. So I think people have heard the warnings for the most part.
All right, thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. We really appreciate all that you're doing. We'll be going back to you throughout the coverage today and tomorrow. Let's go to Chief Meteorologist Rick Reichmuth. He is tracking the storm in the Fox Weather Center. What are you hearing, Rick?
You know, interesting thing that Steve just mentioned. You think back to like Hurricane Andrew. A lot of the hurricanes that have hit Florida, they've hit directly perpendicularly to the land, and you have incredible damage very close to where the center of this comes on shore. This storm looks to be very different. We could be looking at incredible damage all up and down the eastern seaboard, or excuse me, all up and down the east coast of Florida. That means it's going to take a lot longer for first responders to get there. It's going to take a lot longer to get power back onto your place. And that's why the potential scope of this storm is so much more damaging. The winds are still at 140 miles an hour. It's Category 4 storm. And these last images right there, you see that eye very well defined. And the pressure, this is the 5 o'clock advisory, the pressure has dropped a little bit. That means we're seeing it continue to strengthen and not seeing any signs of it weakening in the near future, which is not good news for Florida. So we're getting very close to Florida. Obviously, we have our hurricane warnings in effect all the way up to just north of Charleston and then down to the Miami area. And you see the storm getting very, very close. Already, obviously, the rain moving into Florida all the way towards the western shores, by the way, of Florida. And we have a couple of things there. We've got an outer eye wall. I'm going to go back one picture here to show you this. We have that eye wall right there. That's probably where we have hurricane force winds. And then we have this very center eye wall, and that's where we have the major hurricane, the 140-mile-an-hour winds. If we see that cross over the shore, that's where we're going to see the worst of it. And we hope that it stays just offshore. At this point, I will tell you all of our model guidance is narrowing closer and closer in, that we will be seeing it cross over and make some sort of a landfall here across the eastern seaboard. Either way, you see this red, that's hurricane force winds, starts down around West Palm, goes all the way up through Jacksonville, all the way up across the Georgia coastline, and eventually into South Carolina. This is a future radar I just want to show you. get an idea here, the center of this right there around Port St. Lucie, crossing over shore, that's overnight tonight. It goes up the entire coastline, eventually towards Jacksonville. And just by the way the ocean and the shore here is shaped, the worst of our storm surge is going to be up around Jacksonville in throughout Georgia. Some spots there probably up to around 12 feet of storm surge. That is something that they have never seen there. And then you go up into South Carolina, and that will probably be our biggest rainfall total, some spots around 15 inches. So there is a widespread catastrophe going on for a really large area of land and a lot of people, guys.
Eric Bolling.
So, Rick, I think it's important to note, too, that even though it's a Category 4 and it may go down, Hurricane Katrina dropped to a Category 3 and it's created $125 billion in damage. Even Sandy, I think, dropped to a 1. The point being, that storm right there that you outlined is going to run right up that whole I-95 corridor. There's a ton of infrastructure. There's a lot of damage that they could be taking. Could you tell our audience about the dangers of being even on 95 or inland a little bit as well?
Yeah, so Orlando is under a hurricane warning. So you go inland, we're going to be seeing probably hurricane-force winds well inland. That's going to cause probably some windows to be blown out. It's going to cause a lot of power outages. It's going to cause trees to fall on houses and cars. We oftentimes see fatalities of that. But the closer it gets to the coast, that's where we get the storm surge. And that's what the track is looking like now, that it gets closer and closer right onto the shore. You mentioned that Katrina came on shore as a Category 3. It had been a Category 5 about 24 hours before that. Now, when you have a storm surge, and that's what caused most of the damage from Katrina, it doesn't go away right when the winds go down. It's a bunch of water that's piled up on the right side of the storm. And if the winds weaken a little bit before it makes landfall, that water doesn't all just displace right away. It still stays there. So the Category 4 storm, and by the way, this has remained a major hurricane now for, I want to say, probably 5 days. So there's a lot of water that is piled up from this, and it is not going to go anywhere other than right into the Florida and Georgia coastline. So the storm surge is there, even if it does maybe weaken to a Category 3, which at this point, it will not happen until it gets closer, probably towards north areas of Florida and into Georgia. Don't pay any attention to that. The effects are going to be just the same.
All right, Juan Williams.
Hey, Rick, so, you know, I'm a big sports fan, and I'm not in Florida this weekend, but I imagine they're going to cancel a ton of games. But going up the coast, I hear that North Carolina says they may get some rain, but they don't expect to get hit. Then what happens for Virginia, Maryland? There's a big baseball game in D.C. this weekend. What can we expect?
I think just fine, to be honest with you. Earlier in the week, we thought this was going to move in towards the Northeast. A lot of people in the Northeast, I've still been hearing them here in New York saying, hey, when are we getting the storm? Because they had heard that earlier in the week. That is off the table. We thought it was going to go to the north. It's not going to happen. It is going to stay here and probably move offshore somewhere around South or North Carolina. And then actually, I hate to tell you this, but let me just show you this. This track that you see right here going up the coast, and then here coming off maybe somewhere of the South Carolina coastline. And then at this point, it looks like it comes back down here. Weakens considerably, but we could end up making a play around 6 days somewhere around the Florida coastline from a much weaker storm. But if you have infrastructure problems here because of what this storm that we're seeing right now, and you get maybe a strong tropical storm by the end of it coming back, that's big problems. To answer your other question, though, north of that, maybe into North Carolina, you're going to see some rain, maybe a few showers in towards Virginia, and there's a little bit of a front moving through. Apart from that, that'll bring some rain. But for the most part, mid-Atlantic into the Northeast, you're going to be fine from this storm.
Thanks, Rick.
All right, thank you, Rick. South Carolina is expected to start feeling Matthew's wrath tomorrow, and a mass exodus on the coast is already underway there. Jonathan Fisseri is at Folly Beach near Charleston with the latest. Jonathan, I know that just in Charleston, about a year ago, they had all of that flooding that they had to deal with. What do you hear on the streets now?
Yeah, they did indeed have that flooding, and then they're worried about additional flooding from a combination of factors, storm surge on the coast and even further up away from the coast, because there are so many tributaries that are feeding into the Atlantic that are affected potentially by storm surge, and then also from all of the rain that they're expecting from this very slow-moving storm. So we can expect flooding here in South Carolina. As for the heavy winds we're expecting, you can see people are already boarding up their businesses here on Folly Beach. Many residents say once they finish boarding up, they're going to evacuate this island community, not wanting to take any chances. But Governor Nikki Haley has a warning for those who decide to stay.
But my biggest concern right now is that residents that don't leave today are going to realize suddenly there's nothing open. So they're not going to be able to have access to anything. And we want to make sure that you realize when those things close down, there's nothing that we're going to be able to do to help.
Gas stations, grocery stores, and pharmacies will eventually close. To expedite evacuations from the low country, state highway officials continue to keep a reverse flow of traffic on the eastbound lanes of Interstate 26. In other words, all lanes of I-26 between Charleston and Columbia are moving west, carrying people away from the coast, away from the low country, and into the Midlands. But the reverse lanes do not allow you to exit along the 100-mile route, so motorists need to make sure they have plenty of fuel. So far, there are no major shortages of fuel reported at gas stations, which by and large remain open even here in the low country. But as the governor warns, these gas stations will eventually close once the hurricane gets closer. Back to you,
Greg
guys.
Gutfeld?
Jonathan, I'm a Bay Area kid, so I've never experienced this kind of like mass evacuation thing, and I keep thinking about not the families getting in the cars, but like hospitals and rest homes. I can't imagine the undertaking involved in moving people who can't move themselves. I'm wondering, how do they deal with it? How do they get everybody out?
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking. They've been bringing them by the busload. The Department of Health and Environmental Control has been carrying nursing home patients from the state-run nursing homes and other medical facilities to facilities in higher ground. And then for poor folks or the elderly who simply don't have their own means of getting out of here, they don't have access to their own vehicles, they have sent in more than 300 buses from the upstate region of South Carolina to pick up low country residents and then bring them back to shelters in the upstate. So it is a massive undertaking getting folks who are not able to drive themselves out of this region.
I'm just thinking of the worst case scenario when you're in a hospital and you can't go on a bus. If you're in traction or intensive care, how do you move patients? I find that so mind-boggling in some kind of catastrophe to me.
Yes. For those patients who are critically ill and not able to board or sit on a bus, they're actually being carried by ambulance, and at times we've seen caravans of ambulances lined up ready to pick up those more severe cases.
All right, last question to Juan Williams.
Jonathan, I imagine on the street you run into store owners who say, you know what, I'm going to stick around. I can survive this. I went through what happened in some other hurricane. And then you run into individuals who say, I just don't want to go. I don't care what the governor or the mayor says. I'm staying. Is that your experience?
Oh, absolutely. There are some people who say that they left during previous storms and then they came back to find that the storm had created damage that they felt that somehow they could have prevented if they were there, that they could take evasive action at the last minute to deal with the storm, whatever it was dishing out as it unfolded. And so that's a common theme that you're going to hear among a lot of people who have decided to stay. But on the other side of the fence, there are a lot of people here on Folly Beach in particular, which was devastated in 1989 by Hurricane Hugo, who say, we're leaving, we don't want to take any chances.
All right, thank you, Jonathan.